Hi, everyone. Welcome to the fifth and final season of the Digital Health Summer Internship Speaker Series. My name is Claire Payton. I'm the program manager at the UVA initiative TIDE, which stands for Thriving Youth in a Digital Environment, and I'm also the co-organizer of the series. The reality is that youth today are developing in an increasingly digital world. TIDE operates on the principle that we must understand this impact and leverage young people's digital engagement to expand access to mental health care through innovative digital solutions. That's why we encourage the next generation of research talent to consider careers in the digital mental health industry. In addition to this speaker series, we're also running a remote summer internship program, which has placed 10 graduate students in short-term positions and at both established and startup digital health companies. Through this series, we're collaborating with therapists and tech to bring you a series of talks about career development with experts from the field. Today, we have Margaret Anton, who is the Senior Manager of Clinical Research at Two Chairs, who will be moderating a discussion today with Karl Neumann, Lead User Experience Researcher at Kooth. And throughout the session, please submit questions through the Q&A, and we'll reserve about 10 minutes at the end to address those. All right, Margaret, take it away.
Thanks so much, Claire, and Karl, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, I'm really excited today to lead a conversation with Karl Neumann. Karl currently works as a lead UX researcher at Kooth Digital Health, where he uses qualitative and quantitative methods to de-risk assumptions, power data-driven decisions, and advocate for people interacting with technology. He has experience in AI, content design, conversational design, digital health, in-depth interviewing, patient engagement, survey design, user interface design, and user experience. So just a couple of things he can speak to. But I'm really excited to learn more about Karl's path to this and his experiences. So first, Karl, I would love to hear a little bit more about your career trajectory and how you ended up where you are today.
Thank you, Margaret, and lovely to be here. So grateful for the opportunity. I think I took somewhat unconventional path, and I'm excited to share that. I have a slide I'll share in a moment. But to give you an idea a little bit more about Kooth, it's a company that provides free digital mental health support to young people. So it started in the UK with the NHS, providing digital health support through the NHS, and now we have a contract that provides a free app to all 13 to 25-year-old Californians, bought by the state government. So it's really free at the point of service digital mental health support, which is so rare in this country. So I'm going to share my screen and just take you through it. But Margaret or anyone else, if folks have questions, can you see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
All right, so we're going to go left to right here. It's a bit of a zigzag, but just follow the arrows and my voice. So I have merely a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology from McGill University. I decided to go to McGill. I'm from Chicago, I'm an American, but McGill University is in Montreal because they have the best music, psychology, and music neuroscience research in the world, top rated researchers. So I had read a book by a researcher there, and that's why I applied. I actually ended up working in a music cognition lab there and wrote my undergraduate thesis in basically like why are some melodies more pleasant than other melodies? Measuring these subjective things in a more quantified way. And similarly, I also worked and was a kind of manager in a lab that studied pain and substance use, understanding, like, for example, nicotine use and pain and the relationship. So with that, while I was there, I did a few internships, and we all know the value of internships. But I was very grateful to be in my hometown of Chicago. I'm just going to keep going here. I worked at the University of Chicago for a summer with rats, studying the sense of smell in rats and their brains. It was a neuroscience lab. I never worked with animals. I only ever worked with humans after that because, quote, rats don't have weekends. And I really just enjoyed working with people. I think what I realized is, as much as the science was important and interesting, I prefer kind of the whole human and understanding the complexities, even if it means scheduling is a little bit more challenging. The following summer, I spent at Northwestern University studying chronic pain and the brain, how the brain changes going from acute to chronic pain. was a really wonderful opportunity. And then the following summer, on my trajectory towards what my undergraduate aim was to get a PhD, I was very grateful to spend a summer as a biomedical research intern at the National Institutes of Health. And at the National Institutes of Health, more subjective phenomena, I was studying pain and the placebo effect. So how expectations of pain or reducing pain shape the experience, right? That kind of top-down processing. And that's really what I wanted to highlight. I put a little light bulb in that moment because that is personally when I realized that I might not have wanted to pursue the PhD path, despite being at the pinnacle of that, journey to that point. Um, is it okay if I tell a quick story about that?
Of course.
And I know like there's a lot of clinicians here, but basically I was living in a house of 7 people with 1 bathroom while I was doing my internship. And one of my roommates basically told me early on in the summer that she had like an STD that needed treatment. And of course, no judgment. I said, just get that treated. It's really important. Um, but it was fine that she disclosed that to me. And then 3, 4 months later, near the end of my internship, she told me that she still hadn't gotten treatment. And I said, oh, it's really important to get treatment. This can cause cancer. She didn't know that it could cause cancer. Where she grew up, she didn't get the education that this easily treatable disease could easily kill her as well. And so it was that moment where I thought, well, we've known this for 50, 100 years, but what we need to do is communicate to people the things that we already know. Personally, I was less interested in like mining the information from the universe, and I wanted to take the information and technology that we currently had and bring it to people. That was my personal moment going into my senior or 4th year at McGill, where I decided I might want to dive into industry. And, classic existential crisis. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Maybe be a journalist, maybe be a clinical researcher. And actually, I ended up getting a job with a startup in Los Angeles. And this is what I really want to highlight to everyone, is I got this job not because it was posted. It literally, I was just looking at interesting companies doing interesting things. And at the bottom of the website, it said, questions or comments, let us know. Please keep in touch. And I said, I'm Karl. I'm a 4th year student. I'm looking, I'm very interested in the work you're doing. I'd love to learn more. And that ended up becoming an internship. And that ended up becoming my first full-time job as a clinical researcher. I moved from cold Montreal to sunny Los Angeles. And I began my career as a industry researcher with just a meager bachelor's of arts. But it was all of that kind of training in labs across institutions and doing my own thesis that I think prepared me for that work. And that's where my first opportunity working with psychiatrists and psychologists, social workers, technologists, administrators, really that kind of cross-functional industry experience. It was a lovely time. I was very grateful. I was king on top of the world, balling out in LA. And then, as so many startups do, after about a year and a half, the main investor pulled the plug and I was laid off. And all of a sudden, I'm totally aimless. I went from bawling to bawling, not, walking through the streets of Los Angeles listless. And that is when I made the turn towards digital health. I was a clinical researcher, but I was like, boy, we have these supercomputers in our pockets. If only I could work on something that involved this supercomputer. And I had heard about user experience research. It was a similar skill set. It took some of my like qualitative skills from writing for the McGill Tribune and, the kind of more clinical encounter, right? Where you're one-on-one with someone. And so it felt like this really exciting new field or newer field that took a lot to get my foot into the door in. That's, I think, the most challenging part of user experience is getting that first foothold. And once again, the way I got this job, Memora Health, which was a Silicon Valley Y Combinator, very exciting startup, was hired as their 8th employee. And what happened was there were 2 jobs available. There was a data entry specialist job, the worst title I've ever heard, and a clinical product manager role. And I didn't get the clinical product manager role. And I said, hey, listen, I'll do whatever data entry you want, but I can be your user experience researcher. And I laid out what I could offer to the company in writing. And through a negotiation, that's exactly what happened. And I ended up, it was my first remote job back in 2018, 2019, before the pandemic. And that is how I got my foothold into user experience, by truly scoping and creating a job that didn't really exist otherwise, like making people realize the value. So I can wrap this up in a second, but do you have questions, or would you like me to double click on any of these things to that point?
Well, I just love hearing this. It's always really fun to hear, particularly from folks who don't have super linear or traditional paths. And
Yes.
I think one sort of thing I'm really hearing from you is that networking and putting yourself out there for things that maybe weren't already formed or not super well
Yes.
circumscribed was really key in your career trajectory. I'd love to just to speak to, especially now that the market has changed some, like which pieces of that you feel like are really important for people hoping to make this jump to carry forward in their search.
Yeah. My first and best piece of advice is, do not ask for a job. Ask for a conversation. People love to talk about what they do. People love to talk about what's going on. And that's when then you can say, oh, well, actually, what if we did this? Like kind of prompting. Most people can't give you a job, but most people can have a great conversation and maybe point you in the direction. Or in these cases, there is room for negotiation, especially at a smaller company, right? Where you only have to convince a few people, right? I was the eighth employee, so there was maybe two people I had to convince to get this role. Um, and yeah, one, don't ask for a job, ask for a conversation. Two, like genuine interest. Thinking about, like, at both of these companies, I had some subject matter expertise based on what I had studied. Studying psychology, I had learned a lot about human computer interaction. Memora Health was a conversational AI company before it was cool. Vitality Biopharma was a chronic pain, substance use disorder, and medical cannabis company. And I had knowledge of those things. I had studied chronic pain, I had studied substance use. And so I had, as I'm sure people on the call have their areas of expertise, I think it's really easy to think about yourself as a generalist in the job market, but trying to think about where are you uniquely valuable and knowledgeable, where that kind of X factor can come into play, because people can really sense that. So those two things in combination, you end up in a conversation. They go, wow, this person's really knowledgeable about our field. Maybe it would be beneficial to have them on the team, and kind of bit of like social engineering at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love the ask for a conversation, not a job. And also, I mean, your genuine interest and curiosity just exudes even in the short conversation. I think that's so, so important to find companies and things that you feel passionate about, because it makes having conversations so much easier. I'll let you decide whether you want to answer this now or sort of finish your trajectory, but I like thought I knew what UX research was as someone who did digital health in academia. Like I was like, I'm doing UX research. And then I jumped to industry and was like, oh, there's a whole field that's UX research. And it's not just doing qualitative research with people or semi-structured interviews. So I'd love whenever you feel like it's the right time for you to help educate folks a little bit about what that is, and also like how in this sort of career path you landed on UX research being the thing you wanted to do.
Yeah, I can. I'll answer that now, and that'll take me through to the end of this. So, a few notes. Personally, I am more of a quantitative researcher than most UX researchers. I definitely do both, but I think having the psych background in experimental psych gave me that kind of stats knowledge and analytics and experimental design. But most of the field is quite qualitative, and so that's really like where the clinical training I think is quite useful as well. But I like to say user experience is ironically a very not user-friendly term, right? Like it's not very explanatory. UX, like what does the X stand for? The way I like to say it is, if it's not from the user experience region of France, it's just sparkling product research. It's just design research. Perhaps we shouldn't even call it UX. We should call it design research, product research. That's so much more self-explanatory. So, my day might, and we'll get to it later, I'm sure, but, I definitely am conducting interviews and focus groups and lots of surveys, but I'm also looking at analytics. We're also conducting A/B tests. We're also looking at the primary literature to see, we don't always have to reinvent the wheel with research, right? Maybe there's published findings that we can reference. So it is very much a mixed methods toolkit. And that's part of what I liked about it. There's a lot of variety and a lot of different ways at approaching a problem. Um, I actually really do want to highlight, and I promise this is not a flex, this is the truth. So I had lost my job at Vitality and I spent 6 months unemployed. I'm sure we can relate. And all of a sudden, I had gotten 3 job offers at once. I had gotten an offer at Memorial Health. I had gotten an offer at a big consultancy doing boring work that I didn't want to do, but for a lot of money. And I had gotten a job as a staff researcher at Stanford Medical School, studying pediatric oncology pain, which sounds heavy.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I said no to the Stanford job because of the opportunity to break into UX, to work in a Silicon Valley company, and to get that, initial, like, to kind of veer off of the clinical research brain. And I didn't even really know what UX meant. I'd taken a class online via Coursera. I had done my due diligence as a researcher, but ultimately it was kind of jumping into the deep end of UX. And it's not just because the term sounds so cool. So with that, I hope that answered the question. I spent 3 years at Memorial Health, from their 8th employee until we had 80 employees. And I grew so much. I, was the researcher, but we didn't have a designer. So I said 3 months in, hey, we don't have a designer. Can we hire a designer? And they said, you can learn Figma, Karl. You could be our designer. And that's just how it worked, right? I did client management and content design and all of these different things. So I like to say the smaller the company, the bigger your scope of responsibilities will be. So I spent 3 years there. The company grew so much that I was no longer really qualified to do the work that I was there to do. And so I ended up joining ZS Associates, which is a big management consultant firm, mostly in healthcare. And I was only working on digital health products. So a very focused consultant working with some of the world's biggest healthcare companies on their digital health solutions. You know the names of these companies. And that's where I really got kind of a big training in qualitative research. And actually, to the folks here who are maybe more clinical, I learned it's actually a lot easier to outsource quantitative work than it is to outsource qualitative work. Like, qualitative work is very contextual and cultural dependent and, language dependent. And so I kind of consider my year at ZS like my graduate training in qualitative research. The biggest companies and the best do it. So I spent a year there. Personally, I was consulting, but I preferred being in-house. So I was looking around. And that is how I landed at Kooth. A former colleague at Memorial Health referred me to this role. And let me tell you guys, that is another powerful thing. I was referred to Kooth. I don't know if I would have gotten the job without the referral. And it was from, an on-site where I bonded with a coworker over a new rap album. And he ended up thinking of me 2 years later, referring me to my current job. So yeah, currently I've worked at Kooth about a year and a half. I love it. I get to speak to 13 to 25-year-olds all the time. We get to create free mental health resources, which especially right now is so important and rare in the United States. Like, our biggest problem is that young people think it's too good to be true. We're really working on that. So at a glance, and I'm sorry for the long-windedness, that is my career journey and how I got to the place I am at now.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. There are so many nuggets in there, and I'm sure we'll revisit lots of them throughout the rest of our conversation, but just so many
Cheers.
tidbits on, really putting yourself out there and making connections and how critically important that is to making it work in this field, particularly as the market shifts and changes. I had one more follow-up question around your trajectory. So you and I talked a little bit backstage before we got started. I get asked the question all the time from undergraduates and post-bac researchers who are like really wanting to go the clinical PhD route, but starting to second guess, like, well, if I know my end goal is industry, is the PhD the best way to get there? What does it unlock for me? What doesn't it unlock for me? So as someone who had to make that decision yourself, what would you say the pros and cons? I'm sure you know folks who are clinical and PhDs in the field. Like, what would you say the pros and cons are to going straight from undergrad and a research background into industry versus, taking the 5 or 6 years, which sometimes even I am like, should I have done that? It was a long time to get the PhD.
Yeah, it's a great question. I absolutely see the value in doing a PhD. The two most important things to me are time and focus. And in industry, you rarely have enough time and you rarely have enough focus. So actually, since I've really seen the value, I even consider going back one day for a PhD because, when I was in academia, everyone was like, Karl, slow down. Like, take your time with this. And then the second I got into industries, they said, Karl, speed up. Like, we need you to do this in 2 weeks or a month. I say most of our projects that we do in maybe a month or two deserve a PhD, right? So how can we kind of take that, get 20% input for 80% of the output is a lot of what we think about. Or sample sizes don't tend to be 30 people for qualitative research. They tend to be 5 or 10 because you need to just get a quick read and guide the company forward. I would say, the value it personally, my realization was I didn't want to be a professor, or at least that was not my career plan. And so that was a big reason why I went away from the PhD path. I still would have valued it. I think I also, it's kind of depth versus breadth, right? Like, I've worked on so many different things, everything from conversational AI, substance use disorder, like digital health products, oncology, uh, postpartum care, now obviously mental health care for young people. Like, that depth versus breadth, I think it's like different ways of thinking. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do my PhD in coming out of undergrad. I think now I might have a clearer picture. But I think it's really great if you know what you want to do and you want that time and focus. But for me, it was more about being agile. And I will say something I do love about working in industry is I see the impacts of my work very rapidly in the metrics. Like, we made a change to one feature in the app, and we see a increase in retention, right? Like, we see increases in satisfaction. Like, we can measure the impact. There's absolutely an impact in clinical work and in doing a PhD. And I guess if you're treating patients, you do see that, right? So I come from more of an experimental psych background. Um, but ultimately, yeah, when I started this job at Kooth, I was reflecting on how it was about 5 years since I had graduated. And this was about the time I would have taken, hopefully, to do a PhD. And thinking about the costs and benefits, like, what had I gained and maybe what had I not gained? Like, maybe I would have been more technical or more I think it's just a very different skill set. But there's a lot of transferability. Like, I constantly working with people who have PhDs or clinical training or coaching people who are trying to get into UX with their clinical or PhDs degrees.
Yeah, super helpful. And I think, not every undergraduate student has racked up this much research experience coming out of
Sure.
undergrad and things like that. So, I certainly reflecting on my own trajectory wouldn't have come out of it with the skill set I needed to really perform in the types of roles that I wanted. And the PhD, like you said, was really helpful in being able to have time and space to focus and learn. And even though I knew I wanted to do clinical, I learned a lot throughout that process. So, I ultimately do think, like you're saying, it's knowing yourself and like what you're looking for in that moment, and knowing that very few things close doors to something else. It's just a different way
Yes.
of getting there.
Yeah, and I'm seeing one question in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Calling it like a PhD from industry. I did actually, I'm very proud that when I was with Memorial Health, I published in BMJ Innovations with the University of Pennsylvania on work I did with a conversational AI chatbot and new moms. So I did get that kind of feeling of publishing. There is absolutely publishing opportunities within industry, but the truth is it's not the priority. It's usually like a bonus, or it's with the intention of proving outcomes or proving the effectiveness of what you're working on. So I've had a couple of opportunities to publish. I've published once, extremely proud of that work. I was not the main author. I didn't need to be. I think it's a very different perspective. And like people like, oh, cool, you got a publication, not you need this publication in order to continue your track. So I kind of frame it that way. I've also like worked across different kinds of companies, like little startups, big startups, giant consultancies. So yeah, I feel like I've gotten once again just that breadth of experience and seeing how it's done in industry, which is it's just a very different beast. The main thing, if I can communicate to you academic folks, is brevity. Brevity is the answer to industry. Like often people with academic experience come in and share way too much about the methods. Like the most important thing is an executive summary at the very top. Most people don't read everything, unfortunately. So it's kind of a mindset shift and an audience shift, right? You're not producing for other researchers. You are producing for your stakeholders who are making decisions based off of the things that you're researching. Hope that helps.
I'm laughing because I get the feedback all the time that I am not concise enough. And I think, you're talking about the differences in research, which we can talk even more about, but it is really a shift to be able to go from an academic setting where you have all this data and you're still cautioned from making really strong assumptions or decisions based on it, to having to be okay making really big decisions sometimes with far less information and a lot more certainty around the assumptions that you're making in a short period of time. So I all of that really resonates with me, and what was part of the adjustment in my transition from academia to industry was having to get comfortable with, oh, that sample size isn't nearly big enough for us to draw that conclusion to, okay, we're looking for a trend. We need to make a decision now. Do I feel confident enough? And what are the risks of pulling forward this way?
I want to add one thing to that though, because I totally agree, and I'm glad it resonated. The thing about working on a product with many users is that you have sample size if you are at that stage. So I've worked at companies pre-launch where we really don't have the sample size, right? For like a survey or for an A/B test. But sometimes like we just did an analysis with 35,000 users, right? Like you get access to that, which you get in academia too. Um, that's where a lot of the certainty will come from, is testing, as I like to say, in vivo in the app, right? Or in the product. Um, so, but I'm still constantly trying to explain to stakeholders that like we shouldn't be doing more than 10 qualitative interviews. Like it's not a good use of our resources or time. Think about the confidence curve, right? Like as where does that confidence come from? And if you don't have consensus after 10, that's also a really important finding. Like humans are varied, and there's maybe there isn't a discrete answer to this, or there's variables that we're not considering, like pause the study, plan another study. That's the other thing, is kind of revisiting studies over time to build that confidence instead of a single study that must be perfect and ready for publishing.
Yeah, I love that. And again, all of that really does resonate, both being like, oh my gosh, in 6 months we have 20,000 users. Like I've never seen
Yeah.
data this big in my life, because I was
Right.
working with specific clinical populations, to also really just having to be comfortable with the iterative nature at which research happens in this space, and that you need enough to make the next decision, and then you evaluate again and make the next decision. You've hit on a lot of these things, but just want to give you an opportunity to reflect on like what skills you feel like you got as an academic researcher that were really transferable, and maybe those that like actually you had to adapt a lot for it to work in this space.
Yeah, awesome question. Literature review is such a good skill as a human being, but as any kind of industry researcher, like I think having the ability to quickly find what you're looking for, like knowing when a question is empirical and that there might be an answer to it, like that can save so much time. Um, So I do that a lot at work. I think UX researchers ought to do it more. And like those that don't come from academia don't have that muscle built to just like, oh, I'm going to go look on Google Scholar and find like the 5 most relevant papers to this question to help guide us. So that's super important. Um, oh, I think knowing how much focus needs to go into work, like I think as you prolong, like get through your academic like career, you're probably gonna encounter so much information. Like I was really stunned by like you'll never be able to read all the papers in your field. You need to use your judgment, right? And like that judgment skill is really important when you have so much data to go through, right? I think that's definitely a muscle you can build. Um, I mean, I bring a level of rigor that I think for not having a PhD, people don't expect always. Like, wow, you really went through this. I'm planning a study for understanding our app in Spanish. And I really went into the primary literature. I went into like there's so much background. I also went into the analytics, into the cultural context, like having that ability to kind of 360 a problem. Part of I think a PhD is like learning how to learn and learning how to think and learning how to um, create like novel, useful thoughts, really powerful. And I think without that training and without working in all these labs, probably it wouldn't be so intuitive to do that, right? It's a really great question. I'm sure there are better answers or more answers to that, but those are the ones that come to mind.
I love those answers because they're not the obvious things like go learn SQL or things like that.
Right.
I really like it because it highlights starting to think about some of the softer skills. Like if you all are in training who are in the audience and listening, really starting to think about what you're learning and doing that maybe isn't as easy to like put as a line item on your resume, but will really serve you well. Like I completely agree with you, Karl, that like ability to think about problems and think about how to tackle them in meaningful ways to get to a good answer that weighs all of the different possibilities and things that could go wrong or right, really, really does serve you well in this space. And then also, like you alluded to earlier, figuring out how to communicate that effectively to different stakeholders.
Absolutely. That's a great one. Whatever we want to take it to next.
Yeah, awesome. So uh sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. One of the objectives of the seminar is really to increase awareness about different roles. So you've described UX research for us and defined it a bit, but I think a lot of times when I'm talking to students or trainees, they're like, well, what does that mean for what I'll be doing every day? In academia, you have a pretty clear sense. If I become a professor, I'll do some administrative work, I might teach some classes, I'll write some grants, but people don't really have a sense of like what a day in the life would look like. I would love for you to just share a little bit about what that looks like for you as a UX researcher.
Great question. And it does have a lot of variability. I will say my days are less predictable than even I would like. But here's what is predictable. So many meetings. My significant other, she's like, why are you in meeting? Like, when do you get your work done? And I said, well, big part of my work is figuring out what work needs to be done. Or, ultimately, if I can communicate one thing about UX research, it's that my job is to change hearts and minds. My job is to convince stakeholders to change. Like, ultimately that will affect the code base or the product downstream, but like you need to be able to convince people. You need to be able to um, widely share your findings in a way that's easily accessible. So I'm constantly in meetings with different stakeholders talking about research, talking about findings and how they can apply. Um, so on a regular basis, I'm having at least 1 or 2 meetings syncing with those like ongoing projects, either what research needs to be done, what research we're doing, or what research we've done that we need to then inform the work that we're doing. So that's a huge part of my day. Like probably 50% of my time is meetings. um, Today I led a design review. It's one of my favorite things to do on like a weekly basis. It's kind of like an art review. Like people bring the design and you talk about the context around it, and then you give that feedback, and it's a very open session So, I work very closely with designers and product managers. Those are probably who I work closest with. Clinical teams. I think we're all familiar with clinical teams. Um, there's like so many other functions. There's marketing. There's it can go on and on and on. So like there's a lot of cross-functional time, and most of that is like you're almost like, this is a bad analogy, but like you're almost like a stand-up comedian. Like you're saying the same things and you're like refining the ways to say it that are the most impactful, right? As I was saying, brevity, but also maybe I just need one visual, like one infographic that I can make, or one graph that I can make about the results that we saw that, wow, convinced someone. So that said, there's kind of a few different gears I can be in. There's like research planning phase where it's very heads down, getting feedback from others. There's live research, which if it's unmoderated, I'm just watching the results pour in. Or if it's moderated, it's almost like I'm scheduling sessions, like I'm a clinician, right? Like finding times with a 14-year-old to have a one-on-one conversation about a product. And that often can be like later days, or that can be more all over the place. Um, and then if we're in like analysis synthesis phase, it's very heads down. Like I am burying myself in the data, trying to extract the highest level stuff to communicate quickly, and then going deeper to figure out what are the trends, what are the nuggets of wisdom. So my days are variable. It's very much based on what meetings are scheduled. And then I'm a Google Calendar freak. So I will create like recurring events, reminders, check the App Store feedback, check the inbox that we have about suggestions, look at the product metrics. Like if my time is open, which I think maybe researchers can relate to, it's like, what data can I go open up and gather insights and inspiration from? That's how a lot of my free time gets filled up. Most of it's meetings. That's why I have such a great background. Um, and this is by a Canadian artist, by the way. It's not mine. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it absolutely does answer the question. And, I think before I made the jump to industry, I did user research,
Mhm.
all our research, I would say. But
Sure.
we didn't have product teams or designers I was feeding it back to. It really more was like qualitative understanding of how an intervention or something is working. Sorry, my dog is having a nightmare under the desk, if you can hear that
Oh, oh, no,
noise.
it's okay.
But um, they I guess for people who are less familiar with UX research, can you share a little bit about like how your research is used by cross-functional stakeholders to make decisions and how you
Yeah,
participate in that?
yeah. So there's a few different kinds of user experience research. Um, Generally, they fall into the buckets of generative versus evaluative, and moderated versus unmoderated. Um, I'm going to start with generative versus evaluative. So let's imagine we are trying to create content about stress in school. We probably don't even really know where to start. Like, I don't know what it's like to be a 14-year-old. So I might go do generative research, interviewing or doing a survey to like get ideas, like understand the problem and the reality, like generally getting as close as you can to the people with the problem and hearing from them. So it's like gathering inspiration, gathering ideas to chew on, maybe doing a bit of comparison. But ultimately, it's really about generating ideas and getting close to those folks. On the other side, there's evaluative research. So maybe we've already created a product or a feature. We want to test how it feels for young people. So we'll set up a usability test and get five, random or 10 young people's feedback on the product, on a prototype of the product, in order to iterate on it before it goes live. So there's kind of things in between that, right? Like we could compare two versions, which one do you like better? We might do a survey of real users to get feedback on the product, but generally like generative for inspiration early on in the process, evaluative later on in the process to iterate, ideally before it goes live, but often after it goes live. And then there's an A/B test, testing two similar things within the app in order to see if they move metrics in meaningful ways in order to then have a long-term change for the product.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful. So you're working really, really hand in hand with cross-functional partners and feeding them the insights that they need to really help make decisions about how to carry the product forward.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, what was one thing in your transition from more academic settings to industry that like really surprised you, or was like quite different and an unexpected way?
Yeah, that's a good one. Budgets are weird. They're weird in academia. They're even weirder in industry because you'll kind of vacillate between, yeah, whatever it is, here's the money. Like it's only $1,000 for the study, go run it. Versus sometimes it's very like we need to think about every dollar spent. We need to like I've experienced such a variety of budget details and like when you're not working off of a grant or like the budget of your lab, it's huge constraints potentially to your work. And it like pretty much every project you need to align on like what is the budget and where are we getting it from. Um, the stakeholder management is like there's this meme, X is actually 90% Y. Knitting is actually 90% threading the needle or whatever it is. I really think like research, UX research is 90% aligning with stakeholders, either on what they need or what they expect, or communicating the results with them, doing a workshop with them to kind of chew on the results and think about the impacts. So really it's a communication job. It is a changing hearts and minds job, right? And for example, like your results will not always speak for themselves. Like even if they're really good, even if they're statistically significant, right? It's really a challenge. So for example, one time, a really rock solid finding that I thought would impact the app, I just wasn't getting the change that I wanted. And so then I clipped video clips of my interviews with young people saying the thing that I had found. And that super clip of five young people completely changed people's mind. It was like, I'm a content creator all of a sudden, right? Like taking my raw data of the conversations and bringing that to stakeholders' eyes and ears in order to change their mind, right? So it's like a little strategic, you know. People are not there for the research; they're there to make a decision, and they have enough on their minds, right? So you really need to like get to them in whatever way, and that depends on who they are and where you are. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I love the one about getting creative about how you share things back too. I've found so many times that, as an academic, someone trained as an academic research, you have your like background, your methods, and people want, like you said earlier, the punchline first. And often the voices of the users are way more powerful than a number. So
yeah,
finding ways to infuse quotes or pictures or infographics, like you said, and um, I think that it's really fun, or I enjoy this part. It sounds like you do too, like to think strategically about how to do that and what will be compelling to different folks.
yeah, for real. And it's a little bit of trial and error sometimes,
Oh,
like you don't
absolutely.
know what people's response will be. But yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask one more question before we jump to the Q&A. So audience, please feel free to start dropping your questions for Karl in the Q&A and we'll get there in a moment. You've hit on a lot of really great advice, but just as sort of a summary, if someone out there in the audience really wants to make it in UX research, what concrete advice do you have for them to start getting started?
Yeah. Um, I'll be doing a bit of repeating myself, and I'll share my website in a second too, which I think will help. But two things: researchers are specialists. You will not get a generalist UX research job at some big company. It's just not. There's so much competition, right? So think about what are you uniquely, specially knowledgeable about. It might not even be your professional training. It might be something that you really care about. Maybe you love music and guitars and you can like go to a company that sells guitars or like works on guitars and you can give that, showing that level of expertise and demonstrating knowledge. If you are the user, that really helps, right? you will know so much more and relate so much more. You still aren't most users, but that level of expertise. So knowing, it's like your niche, like it's a bit ecological in that way. Like even me, like I love working in healthcare. I'd love to work in something outside of healthcare one day, but I'm so well suited for what I do and I have so much experience that that's where I get my traction, you know? That's my number one piece of advice. Number two, guys, LinkedIn jobs is like a piranha feeding frenzy. Like, don't apply via LinkedIn jobs. If you see a job you like, go to the company's website, maybe try to message someone on LinkedIn for a conversation, not for give me this job. Bit of that social element. You do not want to be a resume in a stack of resumes. You want to be person. I'm actually going to share my screen really quickly if that's okay.
Of course.
The other thing that's really important in UX, especially as a designer, but also as a researcher, is making a website or having a portfolio, being able to tell your story. You can go to karlneu.com in order to check out my website. It really helps me stand out. Once again, how are you going to stand out, right? Is it your expertise? To me, I put a lot of time and effort into my website, and it really helps me differentiate myself. And relatedly, UX is a field of creativity. And so if you have a creative passion or something that like, is the way you express yourself, like don't hide that. People want a creative UXer. I'm a musician, I'm a producer. I do put that on my website, right? I wrote a poem. I put the poem on the website because people want to see that you're, creative and thoughtful. And, like I kind of hid that part of myself for a while, and actually putting it on my website helped me get traction. And guess what? Oh, then the hiring manager is also a musician and you get to bond over that. Like whatever it is, I think showing that you're really a creative is quite powerful. You'll lose your mind designing website because you're kind of showing your design sense. So that's the other thing, is keep it minimal. I used Wix, Wix.com, but you can use anything. But um, my main recommendation also is for your case studies as a researcher, put them in Google Slides or a slideshow. Like, do not get fancy with it. Don't build a website with your case study. Really, my website's like a launch pad to Google Slides or Google Docs or articles, whatever it is. Like, you'll lose your mind perfecting it. I already did. But I think it was a big differentiator for me. And I'm very proud of my website. Like, I actually have a QR code on the back of my phone. So if someone asks what I do, like I kind of made my own brand and my own logo. And that just helps solidify in people's minds, like, who am I? And how am I different than other folks? Relatedly, this should link you to my LinkedIn. You can also check out my website there. Um, but I hope that that is helpful in thinking about, like, yeah, you are not a generalist. You will not get hired as a generalist position at whatever, Intuit. Like, find something niche, find something that you really know about or that you're really passionate about, because people will feel that and it'll help you be a better researcher.
Yeah, I love that. And on a personal note, as I was prepping for this last night and I showed my partner your website, I was like, whoa, I need to do something. Like my LinkedIn is terrible. So
Oh, I
really
don't know.
impressive. And the work you put into it really does show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And the thing about a website, this is another thing, folks, for a portfolio, just make it. Don't worry. No one cares if you change your website. Product, and that's actually, I'm sorry I missed this. Design and product work is so iterative. Put something out there and then you'll see it and you'll change it. You'll get feedback and you'll change it. You'll be staring at it. You'll be like, oh my God, I need to change this. I need to add this word or change this margin. Like, don't be afraid to just post and get it out there. No one cares if you change it. And let me tell you, I've done way too many iterations. And yeah, have a little bit of fun with it. Bring a bit of yourself into it. I think that's, if it looks like ChatGPT wrote your website or your case studies, like, you're not going to get the job. Bring that in, uniqueness and creativity.
Yeah, I love the reminder too that it's okay to put something out that's not perfect. That's how you get feedback and really do iterate. And it really is a good metaphor for the work that you
That's
do.
UX.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, So there are some questions coming in. The first is
Sure.
curiosity. Earlier in the conversation, you alluded that you have a better idea what you might get a PhD in today than you did when you were in your undergrad. So a question is, what would you get your PhD in? There's someone who is looking for a PhD in non-clinical, but really wants to make sure that they're still keeping the door open to industry.
Yeah, that's awesome. I saw this message. I work with a lot of data scientists. I love data science. I'm not technical enough for that, but it is a great field. I think for me, I've always had a particular interest in pain and chronic pain. I think it's so philosophically interesting and so clinically relevant. It's one that, chronic pain affects billions of people around the world. So if I could look into ways to manage chronic pain or even acute pain, like ways to make, if I could make an NSAID work 10% better and reduce 10% of people's pain who take an Advil around the world every day, like that would be a lot of meaningful difference to me. So pain is a big interest area for me. And I think the obvious one is something in like human computer interaction, which is just a fancy way of like the academic way of saying user experience for the most part. So like maybe something along like novel interfaces, or like maybe something more creative, like back to my music roots of like novel interactive interfaces for making music. I don't know. I don't know. It's such a hard question. I know what my interests are much more, right? But I still don't have like a question or an idea. It's a great one.
Yeah, I love those ideas. It's fun to see not just your, like you said, healthcare background, but your full creative thought process on all things you do.
Cheers.
Um, you've alluded to like not looking for jobs or, well, not necessarily not looking for them, but not applying through LinkedIn. Any advice on where to find career opportunities in UX?
Yeah. And it's a tough market right now, period, across the board. So that makes like kind of the social aspect even more powerful. I recommend looking for companies that interest you. Maybe if they have a UX person, talk to them. Like very top down, very social, I think is quite powerful. Um, Definitely would recommend that. I found my first job at Memora Health in UX off of a place called Well Found. It used to be called Angel List Jobs. So that's like a more startup. Like it is easier generally to get a startup job unless you already have an amazing PhD and it's super relevant. I think startups are really great. So yeah, Well Found. There's called Built In, so like Built in LA, Built in Chicago, Built in DC, whatever. Those are more local startups. It's a great way to find companies and see what they're hiring for. But I think it's really important to try to, the best jobs just aren't posted. I'm sorry to say. There is a cool, I think it's still around. It's a paid Slack group, which sounds terrible, but it's called Health Tech Nerds. And that is a place where people post jobs before they're even listed, or like people make intros and, kind of this like more tight knit community of digital health people. If you specifically want to do digital health tech nerds, I've gotten some consulting gigs doing that just by introducing myself. Um, I like Glassdoor jobs. I like Glassdoor job board better than LinkedIn because you can look at the companies. And I think there's just less traffic than there is on LinkedIn. So you're in a bigger, generally though, if you find a great job, number one, try to talk to someone at the company with a conversation. They might tell you it actually sucks working here. You don't want to work here. Or they might tell you, wow, we actually really need someone with a quant background. And now you know to focus on that. Like you can kind of get some intel without saying, I'm applying for this job, to say, hey, I'm really interested in your story and I would love to hear about what it's like to work at XYZ Kooth. Um, so those are definitely kind of some of my more like social engineering. And then, yeah, if you have, the thing that LinkedIn's great for is see if you have any first or second level connections. Message a first level connection. If you have a second level connection, message your connection to introduce you. Like that human element, especially right now, is so important. I just hired someone and there were 300 applications that I had to look through. A lot of really qualified, smart people. And so how do you stick out among those 300?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also put a plug in for another paid Slack group. Our co-hosts of this series, Therapists in Tech, also have a Slack group that's only about $50 a year. And
Oh, wow.
particularly if you are a clinician or in clinical training, it's a really great opportunity to learn about companies in the mental health space, and also has a really comprehensive job board. And it's just a great way to connect with people
Wow.
and make those connections that Karl, you're saying are so, so important. So just another shout out to that. I think we have time for one more quick question. And there's a question in here about career progression. So we all know if you're truly in the academic path, it can be very clear to you how you get promoted and what the next step in your trajectory looks like. But it is such a black box in industry. So I'd love to hear from you on what that can look like for a UX researcher.
Yeah, and it's not that well defined yet across companies, especially at startups. There's like title inflation is wild, and it's a good thing. I mean, it helps you get future jobs. I wanted to say too, don't just look for UX researcher. There's lots of ways, design researcher, product researcher, qualitative researcher, and so on and so forth. So not just one title. That said, the way it works at Kooth and the way I've seen it at other places is obviously intern, junior, senior, lead, director, VP, CXO, right? Like I'm a lead, right? So that's where I'm in that rung. I'll also really note this is one of the most important things, and I think academics know this. The term senior in jobs in industry is like being a senior in high school. It does not mean that you are like I'm sorry, I didn't communicate. Expertise is so different in industry. Expertise means you've worked on this before. Expertise in academia means you've written a PhD and you have tenured professorship and like expertise gets thrown around so differently in academia versus industry. And so, that progression, like starting as entry level, like junior, or it'll just sometimes they don't even say junior. It'll just be user experience researcher and then senior and then lead and then director or head of is kind of that level. Um, and like from at my lead level, I'm a manager. I also do individual contribution work. Heads tend to not do any or very much individual contribution work. Um, and that kind of most junior above intern tends to be less involved in like road mapping and strategy. It's more about like boots on the ground, getting the research that needs to get done and doing it proficiently. So I do think like it's about once again getting that foothold, getting your methods and knowledge. Like I went to Coursera and I took a University of Michigan course to just get my basics. But yeah, I hope that is a overall good sketch of the progression that you might expect.
Super helpful. Karl, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation today. I know I've learned a lot from you and just
Cheers.
have genuinely enjoyed getting to know you and learning more about what you get excited about. And to the audience, thank you so much for your time
Thank
today.
you.
Uh, that's a wrap for today. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm so grateful. Please keep in touch if folks want to chat one-on-one. I'd also recommend ADP List. It is a free mentorship platform where you can speak with user experience researchers. They already have times available. I've paid hundreds of dollars for an individual mentorship session that were worse than the free mentorship I got on ADP List. So sorry I didn't mention that earlier. Thank you again for this opportunity. I'm so grateful and here to support, Tide or the folks here, however would be helpful. So please keep in touch. I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.